They laughed before she even said a word. Not because they knew her, but because they thought they already did. It was the kind of laughter that cuts deep, the quiet kind, the kind that makes you question your place, your worth, your right to even be there. All because of what she was wearing. But here's the truth no one in that room understood yet. They weren't looking at someone small. They were looking at someone they would one day regret underestimating. And by the time they realized it, it would already be too late. If you've ever felt judged for how you look, this story is for you. Stay with me. She walked into the room trying to be invisible. The door creaked softly as she pushed it open, and for a brief second, all the noise inside seemed to blur together. Voices, laughter, the shuffle of chairs. Elena paused at the entrance, her fingers tightening slightly around the strap of her worn bag. Her clothes were simple. A neatly washed shirt, slightly faded at the edges. Jeans that had been carefully stitched more than once. Nothing dirty, nothing careless, just, unnoticed by kindness, and very noticed by judgment. As she stepped in, her shoes made a faint sound against the floor, and somehow that tiny noise felt louder than it should have. A few heads turned. Then more. Eyes scanned her quickly, up, down, back again. Not curious, but measuring. She lowered her gaze, pretending to look for a seat, even though she already knew where she would sit, the corner near the wall, where she could take up as little space as possible. Her heartbeat picked up, steady but heavy, like a quiet drum inside her chest. You know that feeling, when you're not even being spoken to, but somehow you feel seen in the worst way? That's where she was. Elena kept walking, step by step, her posture careful, controlled. She had learned that if she moved gently enough, maybe she wouldn't attract attention. Maybe she could pass through moments like this without becoming the center of them. But deep down, she already knew. It wasn't going to be that kind of day. The whispers didn't stay whispers for long. At first, it was just a low murmur behind her back, soft enough to pretend it wasn't about her. But then came a small laugh. Sharp. Quick. Followed by another. "Elena, right?" a voice said from across the room, not really asking, just announcing. Then, barely lowered, another voice added, "Does she only own one outfit?" A few people chuckled. Not loudly. Not openly cruel. Just enough to make it feel acceptable. That kind of laughter, the kind that hides behind excuses, hurts in a deeper way. Elena froze for half a second before continuing to walk. Her face stayed neutral, but her chest tightened. She could feel the heat rising to her cheeks, that familiar burn of embarrassment she had learned to hide so well. You know that moment, when your body reacts before your mind can defend you. That's where she was. She reached her seat and sat down slowly, placing her bag beside her like it was something fragile. Her hands rested on the table, fingers slightly curled, as if holding onto something invisible just to stay steady. Behind her, the whispers continued, short comments, small laughs, someone imitating a tone. None of it loud enough to be called out. All of it loud enough to be felt. For a second, she considered turning around, saying something, asking them to stop. But the words didn't come. Instead, she lowered her eyes and focused on the surface of the desk. A tiny scratch on the wood caught her attention, and she stared at it like it mattered, like it could anchor her there, keep her from breaking apart in front of everyone. Because sometimes, staying silent feels like the only way to survive the moment. Her name was Elena, and she had learned early in life how to endure silence. She didn't react. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she had practiced this kind of moment more times than anyone there could imagine. Elena kept her eyes on the desk, her breathing slow and controlled, as if staying calm was a skill she had trained for years. And in many ways, it was. At home, silence meant something different. It wasn't heavy or cruel, it was gentle, tired, but full of love. The small house she lived in carried the soft sounds of effort, the hum of an old fan, the quiet clink of dishes, the careful rhythm of her mother sewing late into the night. Every piece of clothing Elena wore had passed through those hands. You could still see it, the slightly uneven stitches near the sleeve, the thread that didn't perfectly match the fabric. But to Elena, those weren't flaws. They were proof. Proof that someone cared enough to fix, to mend, to try. She remembered standing beside her mother once, watching her repair the same pair of jeans. "We make things last," her mother had said with a small, tired smile. "Not because we have to, but because we respect what we have." That stayed with her. But here in this room, those same clothes told a different story, one she never agreed to. To them, it meant she was less. Less important. Less worthy. Less seen. Elena swallowed quietly, her throat tightening just a little. She could feel two worlds colliding inside her, the one that raised her with dignity, and the one now trying to strip it away. And for the first time that day, a question crossed her mind, soft but dangerous. What if they're right? It scared her. Not because she believed it fully, but because a small part of her was starting to wonder. If this moment feels familiar, hit like, you're not alone. That day, something inside her cracked. It wasn't loud. No one noticed it happen. There was no dramatic reaction, no tears falling in front of everyone, no words spoken. But inside, something shifted. Elena kept staring at that small scratch on the desk, but now it felt blurry, like her focus was slipping. The laughter behind her faded into a distant echo, yet at the same time, it felt heavier, like it had settled somewhere deep in her chest. You know that feeling, when you hold everything in for too long, and suddenly it becomes too much? Not enough to explode, but enough to change you. Her fingers slowly tightened against the surface of the table. Her jaw clenched just slightly. For the first time, it wasn't just embarrassment she felt. It was something else. A mix of shame and anger. Not loud anger. Not the kind that makes you shout. The quiet kind. The kind that asks painful questions. Why is this happening again? Why do they get to decide who I am? Why does something so small feel so heavy? She blinked, forcing herself to stay composed, but her breathing changed, just enough to feel it. In that moment, she realized something that hurt more than the laughter itself. They weren't trying to know her. They had already decided who she was, without ever giving her a chance. And the hardest part? She had started to believe that maybe she didn't have a choice in that. That realization didn't break her completely, but it left a mark. A quiet, invisible crack. The kind that doesn't destroy you right away, but changes the way you see everything from that moment on. For a moment, she thought about disappearing. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Voices came and went, chairs scraped against the floor, someone called her name at some point, but it all felt distant, like she was underwater, hearing the world through a thick layer she couldn't break. When the final bell rang, Elena didn't rush out like the others. She moved slowly, carefully placing her notebook into her bag, as if delaying the moment she'd have to face the outside world again. Her chest still felt heavy. As she walked through the hallway, surrounded by people laughing, talking, living their normal lives, a thought kept repeating in her mind, quiet but persistent. What if I just stop coming? It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a decision. Just a thought that felt dangerously comforting. She imagined it for a second, staying home, avoiding the looks, the whispers, the silent judgments. No more pretending not to hear. No more holding everything in. It would be easier. Her steps slowed as she reached the exit. The late afternoon light hit her face, warm but almost too bright, making her squint. Outside, life moved on like nothing had happened. Cars passed. People chatted. The world didn't stop for moments like hers. And that hurt too. Because when something breaks inside you, you expect the world to notice. Even just a little. She tightened her grip on her bag again, her fingers pressing into the fabric. A mix of emotions swirled inside her, shame, exhaustion, a quiet anger she didn't fully understand yet, and beneath all of that, something softer. Fear. Fear that maybe she didn't belong there. Fear that maybe leaving would be easier than staying and fighting something she couldn't even see clearly. Elena took a slow breath, her shoulders rising slightly, then falling. For a moment, she just stood there, between leaving and giving up, not knowing yet which one she would choose. But life didn't give her that option. That evening, Elena sat at the small table in her home, the surface slightly worn from years of use. A single light bulb hung above, casting a soft yellow glow across the room. It wasn't much, but it was warm, familiar. Safe. Her mother moved quietly in the background, folding clothes with careful hands. The same hands that had stitched Elena's shirt. The same hands that never complained, even after long days. "Elena," her mother said gently, without looking up, "how was your day?" For a second, Elena froze. The words were simple, but the answer wasn't. She could have said the truth. She could have talked about the laughter, the whispers, the way it made her feel small. But instead, she forced a small smile. It was okay. Her voice sounded steady, but inside, everything still felt shaken. Her mother nodded, as if she understood more than what was said. And maybe she did. There was a quiet wisdom in her silence, the kind that didn't need explanations. Elena looked down at her notebook on the table. The edges were slightly bent, pages filled with careful handwriting. Her dreams lived there, goals she hadn't shared with anyone, not even her mother. For a moment, the thought returned, what if I just stop? But then, something else followed. A memory. Her mother, late at night, fixing clothes under that same dim light. Her tired eyes, but determined hands. They never stopped. Elena swallowed, her chest tightening again, but this time, it felt different. Not just pain, but something stronger beginning to rise. Responsibility. Hope. A quiet kind of courage. She picked up her notebook slowly, running her fingers over the cover. Maybe she couldn't control what people said. Maybe she couldn't stop the laughter. But there was one thing she could control. What she did next. And somewhere deep inside, that small voice spoke again, clearer this time. What if you don't run? What if you prove them wrong? She started small. That night, after everything grew quiet, Elena opened her notebook again. The house had settled into silence, the kind that feels heavier after a long day. The faint sound of the wind brushed against the window, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once. Then nothing. She sat there, staring at the pages filled with her handwriting. For a moment, doubt tried to creep back in. What if it's not enough? What if they're still right? Her fingers hesitated, then tightened slightly around the pen. No, she whispered under her breath, almost as if she needed to hear it out loud. She leaned forward and began to study. Not in a dramatic way. Not with sudden confidence or motivation. Just, quietly. Consistently. Line by line. Page by page. At first, it was hard to focus. Her mind kept drifting back to the laughter, the looks, the feeling of being less. But every time it happened, she gently pulled herself back. Again. And again. Hours passed without her noticing. The next day, she did it again. And the day after that. And the one after that. While others spent time chasing attention, Elena was building something invisible. She stayed after class when she could, asking questions, even when her voice felt small. She borrowed books instead of buying new things. She watched free lessons late at night, her eyes tired but determined. No one applauded her effort. No one noticed the extra hours. But something was changing. Slowly, quietly, she was changing. Not on the outside, her clothes were still the same. But inside, something stronger was growing. Discipline, focus, resilience. And with each small step, that fragile voice of doubt became a little quieter. While another voice, steady, calm, and powerful, began to take its place. Comment strong if you believe people are more than appearances. The same people who laughed didn't notice her changes. Days turned into weeks, and Elena kept showing up the same way, quiet, simple, almost invisible to those who had already decided who she was. They still laughed sometimes, still whispered, still glanced at her like she didn't belong. But something was different now. Not in them. In her. Elena no longer reacted the same way. The laughter still reached her ears, but it didn't settle in her chest like before. It passed through, like noise in the background of something more important. Because now, her focus had shifted. While they talked, she listened. While they judged, she learned. While they looked at appearances, she worked on substance. There were small moments, almost invisible to anyone else, that showed her progress. Answering a question in class without her voice shaking. Understanding something faster than before. Finishing an assignment and feeling proud. Real pride. The quiet kind that doesn't need approval. One afternoon, as the teacher asked a difficult question, the room went silent. No one raised their hand. Elena felt her heart beat faster. The old fear returned for a second. What if I'm wrong? What if they laugh again? Her fingers twitched slightly on the desk. Then slowly, she raised her hand. A few heads turned. Not with laughter this time, but surprise. The teacher nodded, inviting her to speak. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, steady. And when she finished, there was no laughter, just silence. Different silence. The kind that makes people think. She lowered her hand, her heart still racing, but something inside her shifted again. For the first time, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was becoming someone they couldn't ignore anymore. Then came the first opportunity. It didn't arrive with noise or excitement. No big announcement. No spotlight. Just a simple notice written on the board at the front of the room. Academic competition, open to all students. Most people barely paid attention. A few glanced at it, shrugged, and went back to their conversations. For them, it was just another optional activity, something extra, something easy to ignore. But for Elena, it felt different. Her eyes stayed on those words a little longer than everyone else's. An opportunity. Her heart started to beat faster, not out of excitement, but fear. The kind that makes your stomach tighten before your mind even understands why. This is your chance, a voice inside her whispered. But another voice came just as quickly. Or your chance to fail, in front of everyone. She looked around the room. The same faces. The same people who had laughed, whispered, underestimated her. The thought of stepping forward, of being seen again, brought back that old feeling in her chest. That mix of shame and fear. Her fingers pressed lightly against the edge of the desk. What if they laugh again? What if I'm not good enough? For a moment, she almost looked away. Almost convinced herself it wasn't worth it. That staying invisible was safer. But then, something changed. Not outside. Inside. She remembered the nights spent studying under that dim light. The quiet effort. The small victories no one saw. All of that. For what? To stay hidden? Elena took a slow breath, her chest rising, then falling. This time, the fear didn't disappear. But it didn't control her either. After class, while most students rushed out, she stayed behind. The room felt different now, quieter, almost calm. She walked toward the front, each step steady but heavy with meaning. The teacher looked up, surprised. Yes. Elena hesitated for just a second, then spoke. I'd like to sign up. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. And in that moment, without anyone applauding, without anyone even realizing it, Elena made one of the most important decisions of her life. She entered. The moment her name was written down, it felt real. There was no turning back now. As Elena stepped out of the classroom that day, the hallway seemed louder than usual. Conversations echoed, footsteps rushed past, but for her, everything felt sharper, more intense. She had done it. And almost immediately, the doubt returned. What did I just do? Her chest tightened again, that familiar fear creeping in. This wasn't just studying quietly anymore. This meant standing in front of others. Being seen. Being judged, not just for what she wore, but for what she knew. That night, the pressure felt heavier than ever. She sat at her table, the same dim light above her, but now the pages in front of her seemed different. Not just notes anymore, now they were preparation. Expectation. Responsibility. Her mind raced. What if I fail? What if this proves them right? Her hands trembled slightly as she held her pen. For a moment, she almost closed the notebook. Almost gave up before even trying. But then, she took a deep breath. Slow. Intentional. She remembered why she started. Not for them. Not to impress anyone. For herself. That thought didn't erase the fear. But it gave her something stronger to hold on to. So she kept going. The days that followed were not easy. There were moments of frustration, when nothing seemed to make sense. Moments of exhaustion, when her eyes burned from lack of sleep. Moments of doubt, when that voice whispered, "You're not enough." But there were also moments of growth. Understanding something that once felt impossible. Solving problems faster. Feeling capable. Little by little, Elena was building confidence. Not the loud kind, but the quiet, unshakable kind that comes from effort. And even though no one else noticed yet, she was no longer the same girl who walked into that room trying to be invisible. The day of the final presentation arrived. The morning felt different. Elena woke up before the alarm, her eyes opening into the soft gray light of dawn. For a few seconds, she just lay there, staring at the ceiling, her heart already beating faster than usual. Today was the day. She sat up slowly, the air cool against her skin. Everything around her looked the same. The small room, the folded clothes on the chair, the quiet stillness of early morning. And yet, nothing felt the same inside her. Her stomach tightened. Not just fear, something deeper. Anticipation. She stood in front of her clothes, her fingers brushing lightly over the fabric. There were no new options. No special outfit for the occasion. Just the same simple clothes. For a brief moment, the old thought tried to return. What will they think? But this time, it didn't stay. She took a slow breath and got dressed anyway. Carefully. Respectfully. Not to impress anyone, but because she respected herself. When she arrived, the room was already filling up. Chairs were arranged in rows, voices buzzing with energy. Participants stood in small groups, some confident, some nervous, all trying to hide it in different ways. Elena stepped inside. And just like before, a few heads turned. But something was different now. She noticed it immediately. The looks weren't the same. There was curiosity. Maybe even a hint of doubt, but not the dismissive kind from before. She walked to her place, her posture straight, her steps calm. Her heart was still racing, her hands slightly cold, but she didn't shrink. You could feel it. That quiet shift. The same girl. The same clothes. But a completely different presence. As her name was called, the room seemed to hold its breath for a second. Elena stood up. And for the first time, she didn't feel like disappearing. Share this with someone who needs to hear this today. When she spoke, the room went silent. Elena walked to the front, each step steady, even though her heart was pounding hard enough to feel in her chest, in her throat, even in her hands. She stopped in place, facing the room. For a brief second, everything hit her at once. The faces, the eyes, the weight of being seen. The old fear tried to rise again. What if you freeze? What if they laugh? Her fingers tightened slightly around her notes. Then, she took a slow breath. And began. Her voice came out soft at first, but clear. Not perfect. Not loud. But real. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress. She simply spoke, with everything she had learned, everything she had worked for, everything she had built in silence. As she continued, something unexpected happened. The room changed. The small movements stopped. The whispers disappeared. Even the restless shifting of chairs faded into stillness. People were listening. Not out of politeness. Not out of obligation. But because they were drawn in. Her words carried weight, not just information, but effort, discipline, truth. You could hear it in the way she explained things, in the confidence that slowly grew with every sentence. Halfway through, her voice became stronger. Her posture more grounded. She wasn't just presenting anymore. She was owning the moment. And for the first time, the same people who once saw her as less were seeing her for who she really was. Not her clothes. Not her silence. Her strength. When she finished, there was a brief pause, just a second. And in that silence, everything had already changed. And then the result. The silence lingered for a moment longer than expected. Elena stood there, her hands still, her breathing slightly uneven as the weight of what she had just done settled over her. She didn't look around right away. Part of her was still that same girl, afraid of what she might see in people's faces. Then, it came. Applause. Not hesitant. Not polite. Real. It started with a few people, then spread across the room until it filled the space completely. The sound echoed against the walls, louder than any whisper she had heard before, but this time, it didn't hurt. It lifted something inside her. Slowly, she looked up. The same faces were there, but they weren't the same anymore. There was surprise. Respect. Even a hint of admiration in some eyes. People who once laughed were now clapping for her. Elena felt her chest tighten again, but this time, it wasn't from shame. It was something she had never felt like this before. Recognition. She walked back to her seat, her step steady but light, as if something heavy had finally been released. Her hands rested on the table again, but they weren't trembling anymore. Time passed slowly after that. Other participants presented, the judges whispered among themselves, papers were shuffled. The tension in the room built with every minute. Elena kept her eyes forward, but inside, everything was moving fast. Was it enough? Her heart beat louder again, not from fear this time, but from hope. Finally, one of the judges stood up. The room fell silent once more. Elena. Her name echoed clearly. First place. For a second, just one, everything stopped. The sound, the movement, even her thoughts. She blinked, almost as if she hadn't heard it correctly. Then the applause returned, stronger than before. But this time, it felt different. Because now, it wasn't just noise. It was proof. Afterward, someone approached her, the same voice that once mocked. The room was still filled with movement, people talking, congratulating, gathering their things. But for Elena, everything felt slower now, almost distant. She stood there for a moment, holding the weight of what had just happened. First place. Not imagined. Not hoped for. Real. She took a step forward, still processing it, when she heard footsteps approaching. A familiar voice. Hey, Elena. Her body reacted before her mind did. She turned slowly. It was one of them. The same person who had laughed. The same voice that once made her feel small without even trying to hide it. But now, that confidence was gone. Their posture was different, shoulders slightly lowered, eyes not as steady. There was hesitation there. Something uncomfortable. I didn't think, they started, then stopped. For a second, silence hung between them again, but this time, it wasn't heavy. It was honest. Elena looked at them, really looked. And for the first time, she didn't feel that old tightness in her chest. No anger rising. No need to defend herself. Just calm. They tried again. I mean, you were really good. The words weren't perfect, but they were real. And you could hear it, regret, quietly sitting behind every syllable. Elena could have said a lot in that moment. She could have reminded them of the laughter, of the whispers, of how it felt to be judged without being known. But she didn't. Instead, she gave a small, sincere smile. Thank you. That was all. No pride. No bitterness. Just dignity. Because at that point, she didn't need to prove anything anymore. And somehow, that simple response said more than any argument ever could. It wasn't just a moment of victory. It was a moment of quiet justice. Years later, Elena would be known for her work, her intelligence, her impact. Time passed quietly, the way it always does. Days turned into months, months into years. The moment that once felt so overwhelming became a memory, but not one that faded. One that shaped her. Elena kept moving forward. She studied harder, pushed further, and took every opportunity that once scared her. Not because the fear disappeared, but because she had learned how to walk through it. Her world grew. New places. New challenges. New people. And this time, when others looked at her, they didn't see her clothes first. They saw her confidence. Her knowledge. Her presence. She became known for what she could do, not what she wore. For her ideas, her discipline, her quiet strength. But here's what mattered most. She never forgot where she came from. At home, that same small table still stood. The same soft light still filled the room. And her mother still carried that quiet strength that had shaped everything Elena became. Sometimes, Elena would sit there again, running her fingers over old notebooks, remembering the nights no one saw, the effort no one applauded. And she would smile, not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. Because in the end, nothing about her clothes had changed that day, but everything about her did. She didn't rise by becoming someone else. She rose by finally seeing her own value, before the world did. And maybe, that's the part that stays with you. Not the laughter. Not the judgment. But the moment you decide that you are more than what others see. Before you judge someone by what they wear, remember this: the strongest stories are often hidden in the simplest appearances. In the end, nothing about her clothes had changed. but everything about how the world saw her had. Because the truth is, people will always be quick to judge what's visible and completely blind to what's powerful inside. She didn't win by becoming someone else. She won the moment she stopped shrinking to fit their expectations. And maybe that's the part that stays with you. Not the laughter. Not the humiliation. But the realization that your worth was never in their hands to begin with. So before you judge someone by what they wear, remember this: you might be standing in front of a story that hasn't revealed its strength yet. Subscribe for more stories that remind you of your worth, and never forget who you are.